Yoga means to unite. So your coming together is an expression of another form of yoga. About 9 years ago, right here at the UN, I had the honor to propose celebrating the International Day of Yoga on 21st June.
Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to this edition of The Right Stand. I'm Anand Narsuman. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, after leading the Yoga Day celebrations at the UN headquarters, where a Guinness record has been set with the people from the most number of nationalities coming together to do yoga. So that's also etched in the record books this day, the 8th version of the International Yoga Day, the 8th International Yoga Day, 21st of June 2023, etched in the record books. And post this, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will lead the global community as he's celebrating the International Yoga Day, and over 180 nations, prominent personalities all participating. But what's going to be more important is what Prime Minister Narendra Modi will do beyond, going forward. Because post this event, he then heads to Washington, D.C. around 8:30 p.m. IST. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will land at the Joint Base, Andrews Base at Washington, D.C. at about 11:40 p.m. India time. And Prime Minister will attend a skilling for future event at the National Science Foundation. U.S. First Lady Jill Biden and PM Modi will also visit the National Science Foundation at 2:30 a.m. That's in the wee hours of Thursday. Here in India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is scheduled to meet CEOs of various companies in Washington, D.C. And post the business meet, U.S. President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden will receive Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House, where they will host an intimate dinner for the Prime Minister. We are given to understand there is time scheduled for a heart-to-heart, private, one-on-one conversation between President Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi before they even sit for dinner. It's a very, very historic trip, because it's the first time in the last 9 years that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been accorded a state visit, or the status of a state visit, his trip to the United States. Joining us now, let's go straight across to him, is renowned academic and someone who's perhaps one of the first foreign nationals or academics to study the RSS very closely from the 70s, nearly 5 decades now. Walter Andersen ji is with us. Namaste. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
Let me ask you, you had recently commented, and if I remember, my memory serves me right, that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is trying to pinch a few pages from Deng Xiaoping's playbook. Where do you see his current US visit and his engagement with the United States as part of that playbook?
Well, I think he obviously wants for India to play, to get a seat at the high table of international relations. And I think this is an occasion to do so. In fact, going back to your clip there on the Yoga Day at the UN, this is, I think, part of that effort to showcase India and an aspect of Indian culture that's important, with he taking the lead with some 180 countries, as you noted. So I think that's an important part of this visit, and therefore somewhat comparable to previous Chinese efforts to get at the high table, which included visits by high-level Chinese officials to the U.S. And there's a lot of focus being put on this visit, both in India as well as here. And there are a couple of objectives I think the Prime Minister has. One is economically, to build up the economics, which the U.S. and India now have $190 billion in annual trade. I think they want to increase that over the next few years to $500 billion. The other element of the visit is security, obviously, where they will talk about issues, but you might want to sort of talk about sort of restraints on India, constraints regarding that. And obviously, the major strategic issue is China and the Indian Ocean. Then, not to be overlooked is interaction with the Indian American community.
Yes.
The Indian American community is at 4.5 million, growing relatively rapidly. And it's the wealthiest and best educated community in the United States, and plays a role, as we saw during the debates in Congress on the nuclear deal. The Indian American community played a role and continues to play a role in American politics.
But what do you think will be the key takeaway, the one big takeaway that Prime Minister Narendra Modi would want to come away with?
One big takeaway, I think, is recognition of India as a world leader. And I think our government is preparing to do that, that it takes him seriously, it takes India seriously, and India is a player at the high table, which is something I think that Prime Minister Modi has sought for the last few years to do that India has a seat at the high table of international politics.
But what's in it for America? Because America is also known to exact its pound of flesh, Walter. So,
yes, in fact, some Congress people wrote a letter, as you may know, some 75, suggesting that President Biden, in effect, lecture Prime Minister Modi on human rights issues. The White House has said it's not going to lecture. It almost certainly will bring them up. And in fact, India may bring up issues in the United States as well regarding that question. But I think neither one plans to make a big issue of it. I think they will draw attention to it and not make a big issue of it. Because there are other things. For Prime Minister Modi, I think it's India, gets a seat at the high table, and I think President Biden, for a whole variety of reasons, is willing to go along with that. And the other thing, and to do that, is to build up supply chain linkages with India. You're already getting major U.S. companies beginning to sort of invest in India. The Prime Minister has already met with U.S. business people yesterday, and he's planning to do so in the future, including with Musk, who has talked about opening a factory in India to manufacture electrical vehicles.
but can India play a stabilizing factor in the Indo-Pacific? Does India have that economic prowess? Because that's, again, something which Deng Xiaoping had envisioned, that China can grow stronger only if it's a strong economy. PM Modi seems to be working in that direction.
Well, I think that is. And not only Modi, but his External Affairs Minister, Jai Shankar, has often argued that Indian foreign policy is strengthened by a strong India. And I think that's no doubt that's the case. And I think the Prime Minister believes that as well, that the stronger the economy, the more clout that India has, the more respect it has. And in the case of the Indian External Foreign Ministry, it's how you train people. The Indian foreign minister officers, like the U.S., had usually a weak training in economics because the focus was not on economics. The focus was on something else. He, at that time, and this is a couple of years ago, had said that the Indian Foreign Ministry, External Affairs Ministry, had to focus in its overseas work more on economics. And I think that you have something like that in the United States as well, where there's more focus on economics and how to advance the economic interests of our countries. And in the case of India, I think that's clearly the case. Look at this visit. Who's going along? I mean, it's very focused on developing links with private American enterprise, with the hope that private American enterprise invests more with India, and it's starting to happen already. And the other interesting question is, as more industry in China begins to get nervous about being in China, where do they go? And I think, one of the aspects of that is to look at India as an alternative.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi derives his roots from the RSS, from the Sangh. And time and again, there's been an effort to paint him, even by the Congress party closer home and abroad, by those who are spinning a narrative that he's a Hindutvavadi, a fascist leader, a Hindu nationalist leader who has fascist intentions. Would you agree with such a narrative or such an observation?
No, it's much too simplistic. It's the RSS as an organization is very complex in itself, has a number of groups within it. In fact, people should read my most recent book that came out 2 years ago on the RSS, where I go into a whole range of issues and where there's internal debate on issues. So it's not nearly as cohesive and as together on issues, on major issues, there are debates. Take the labor question, for example. There is internally within the Muslim labor affiliate, a debate on how that should be proceeding. So, in fact, it's one of the few parties in India that's truly democratic, even though the prime minister is extremely popular. In fact, that is a potential problem. He is so popular that, the thing is, the party has to be careful that it doesn't allow his popularity to impede its protection of the electoral process. So far, it doesn't look like it has. As you know, the BJP lost a major election, state election in Karnataka. And it has also done, not as well as in Himachal Pradesh as it did before. India has elections coming up, and so does the U.S., though the Indian one comes slightly before the U.S. elections. And this visit is important for both sides, the American side and the Indian side, for domestic considerations, electoral considerations. It certainly helps Modi in the U.S. to get the appearance of support in the U.S., which he will, I'm sure of that, and all that goes along with it, because I'm sure your station will broadcast, the state dinner, the address to the joint sessions of Congress, and other things, as you did with the UN at the UN and the yoga. So it is but it's also important for Biden. You've got a large Indian American community. It has a lot of money. And all one has to do is to read the Wall Street Journal, one of the major newspapers of American business, to see how important Indians are becoming in the U.S. world of manufacturing and science and development. So it's and Modi, in fact, has been meeting with some of those people, including some Indian Americans, who are among the CEOs of major corporations.
Walter, in RSS, A View on the Inside, you referred to that in 2018. That was a sequel to Brotherhood in Saffron that was written about 3-4 decades ago, if my memory serves me right.
Late 80s, yes.
Late 80s, yes. So is Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the RSS, are they taking India in the right direction? Have they also evolved? Is India truly going to represent humanity, one world, one family, one future? That's the thought behind the G20 leadership also this time around. Would you agree with that? Or do you have concerns that they may falter and they have issues which they need to contend with? They still haven't got everybody on board.
Well, no, that's true. I mean, there is an internal debate. There is a hard right within it, but so far they have not called the shots on most issues, in fact. And in fact, the BJP has not been able to establish, unlike, the party in China, the kind of control of the political process. It lost an election in one of the largest states in India, Karnataka, recently, and it was looking for Karnataka to be a entree to further gains in the south. Well, that looks like it's not going to happen. And Prime Minister Modi was an active campaigner in those elections. Now, it's not like the elections weren't in terms of popular vote, wasn't that far apart, but it was sufficient that I think the BJP has to learn a lesson, and I think it has been. That it has to be cautious about how it appeals to the voter, and which is a very complex. India is such a complex place. When I have to give lectures in India and talk about the dozens of languages and the castes and the economic variations, it's an incredibly complicated place. And can you imagine a democratic political party operating in that context?
Yes,
is going to have issues it has to sort of handle. I think India, by and large, has done well. Elections have gone ahead. There have been wins and losses, including losses by the governing party, where it had, in the case of Karnataka, a recent case, it's had to shift. But it's done very well in some recent elections, too. Prime Minister's own state of Gujarat, it had an unprecedented victory. But there are places where it has not. And as long as the electoral process stays open, I think that Indian democracy is served by that participation and speaking out. It's not that there aren't issues. There are issues about the press, which you probably well know about, and there are issues on other issues such as Rahul Gandhi and whether or not he can actually participate as a parliamentarian. So there are those issues which are there. Some of them may be mentioned in this visit of the Prime Minister to the U.S., but as I said, the White House has said it intends to engage and not lecture India on that. Now, that's an important statement it's making, because that's obviously a statement you make to a world leader, that you're not going to sort of embarrass him in ways that could damage him at home or internationally. And the Prime Minister is clearly here. I think his major reason is to, ensure that he has a place at the high table of international politics.
My final question, Walter. Antony Blinken leaves China's shores, or flies out of China, and Joe Biden calls Xi Jinping a dictator. Joe Biden and Jill Biden, they're going to engage with the Prime Minister quite a bit. Do you see this setting up a conflict between India and China in the near future? Do you see a conflict arising in this region because of growing India-US proximity?
Well, there is problems between India and China already in the region. I actually, as you may know, I actually taught in China for several years. And one of the things that always struck me about dealing with Chinese who deal with foreign affairs is the Chinese respect strength. And that certainly, Prime Minister Modi and his defense minister certainly have asserted themselves that India, puts up a strong resistance to any threats to it. Are they worried about the relationship with the U.S.? They are, but I think the Indians themselves, one of the major points about Indian foreign policy is it will not join an alliance. It will not be a participant in any assertive activity. And here I'm thinking about China, but perhaps even Pakistan, unless there's a direct threat to India from those countries. It just will not, because I think it argues, rightly in my view, that such alliances undermine the maneuverability of Indian foreign policy.
Great. Walter Andersen, always a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you very much for making the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We look forward to...
Loved your 2018 book, though. Thank you.
I'm glad you did. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hopefully some people will buy. The people who are listening to this will buy the book.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Namaste. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's quickly get a move on here and stay with the aspect of the dragon. China is at it again. This time, Beijing has blocked India and US's joint move to designate Sajid Mir a global terrorist. Sajid Mir is a Pak-based Lashkar-e-Taiba operative who's wanted in the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks. The block by China follows its use of a quote-unquote technical hold to stymie a similar move by India earlier too. India has slammed China at the UN and said that there's something genuinely wrong in this fight against terrorism, and it's nothing but petty geopolitical interests. India also has offered several solutions to the UN Security Council to prevent member states from backing terrorists. So, by shielding Sajid Mir, is Beijing drawing the battle lines? We'll talk about that, but first, let's tell you a little more about Sajid Mir. Who is Sajid Mir, whom India and US want to be tagged as a global terrorist? He's a Pak-based Lashkar-e-Taiba operative, chief planner of the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. US placed a $5 million bounty on his head, listed on the FBI's most wanted terrorist list, one of India's most wanted terrorists, plotted the terrorist attack in Australia in 2003, and there was an audio recording of his that was played in the UN, wherein he is actually instructing terrorists holed inside the Taj Hotel that if you see anybody walking around on the terraces, shoot them down. Now, this is not the first time that China has blocked India's proposal. Masood Azhar, Jaish-e-Mohammed chief. First, China shielded Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar. China first put a technical hold in 2009, 2016, 2017 and March 2019. And China said it needs more time to assess information and finally accepted it in the fifth proposal in May 2019. China also blocked a bid by India to designate Abdul Rauf Asghar, one of the masterminds of the 1998 IC-814 hijacking, as a global terrorist, and said that it needs more time to carefully evaluate the proposal. Asghar is a brother of Pak-based Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorist Masood Azhar. Now, he's accused of masterminding a number of terror attacks himself. It's not the first time China has blocked a bid to tag Sajid Mir as a global terrorist. Last year in September too, China blocked India's bid. In October 2022, China blocked the bid to designate Talha Saeed, son of Lashkar-e-Taiba chief Hafiz Saeed, as a UN-listed terrorist. Now, at a high-level United Nations conference on counter-terrorism, India lashed out at China after it blocked India's bid. Prakash Gupta, the Joint Secretary at the United Nations, said justice still continues to elude the victims of Mumbai terror attacks and played an audio recording of Sajid Mir guiding fellow terrorists to hunt down foreigners inside the Taj Hotel and kill them indiscriminately.
He was listed as a proscribed terrorist under the national laws of India. He was proscribed under the laws of the United States, this host country, and of several other countries globally, many of whose nationals lost their lives. But when the proposal for listing him did not go through the Security Council sanctions regime, we had strong reasons to believe that something was genuinely wrong in the global sanctions regime, as manifested in the Security Council. If we cannot get established terrorists who have been proscribed across global landscapes listed under the Security Council architecture for pure geopolitical interests, then we really do not have the genuine political will needed to sincerely fight this challenge of terrorism.
तो जो जहाँ पे आपको मूवमेंट नजर आती है, बंदा की छत पे चल रहा है, कोई आ रहा है, जा रहा है, उसको फायर ठोको. उसे नहीं पता यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है. इंशाल्लाह. तो जो जहाँ पे आपको मूवमेंट नजर आती है, बंदा की छत पे चल रहा है, कोई आ रहा है, जा रहा है, उसको फायर ठोको. उसे नहीं पता यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है. इंशाल्लाह.
And on the same story, a mega CNN News 18 exclusive, our investigations editor Manoj Gupta getting us these inputs from top intel sources who are telling News 18 that Sajid Mir blocking is desperate attempt by China to support Pakistan in terror activities. Top intelligence sources telling CNN News 18 that while Pakistan denies the location of Sajid Mir, India has given his locations multiple times, including video proof. Intel source reveals that Sajid Mir is accused in 26/11 Mumbai attacks and should be punished to save the world from terror activities. We are also given to understand why our intel source that his name was even confessed by David Coleman Headley, and everything is on record. Kamal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, with us. Professor Victor Gao, Chair Professor at Shuchao University, with us. VP CCG and former Chinese diplomat, and also Daniel S. Markey, Senior Advisor, South Asia, United States Institute of Peace. Namaste. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Kamal Sibalji, how would you respond to this? How does India take this forward? A lot of experts have been critical of India for not taking China's name openly while making this mention. Where would you stand?
Well, I think this decision by China, once again, to block the designation of Sajid Mir as a terrorist. We just heard, a phone conversation by this fellow asking the terrorists to kill anybody who moved.
Yes.
I mean, China is sending several messages. One is that they are not at all concerned about India's sensitivities. They don't want to send any positive message to India. Even if the G20 summit is in the offing, they don't want to even make a gesture which will actually cost them nothing. Okay, the border issue is a much more complex matter, and we are having bilateral discussions. But on this, the case is so clear. The case is so clear, but they don't feel obliged at all to make any positive gesture which might create the right atmosphere for a G20 meeting if Xi Jinping comes to India. Number two, China is violating all its commitments it has made in various forums, whether it is the BRICS summit, BRICS forum, or SCO, or the G20, or any other discussion in international forum, even when it relates to Afghanistan and everything else, where everybody agrees on countering international terrorism. China is party to all this, but yet when it comes to India, it violates all its commitments and actually doesn't bother about how it looks, how the world will look at it, how its image may get affected. They're quite unbothered. And thirdly, of course, there's complicity between China and Pakistan, long-standing complicity, because China knows what the message is, that they will support Pakistan on terrorism directed at India. And it is at Pakistan's behest that China does all this. They want to cultivate favor with Pakistan at the expense of India and at the expense of an international consensus on countering terrorism. They have been, as you know, Anand, in various forums, actually praising Pakistan for fight against terrorism, saying how much Pakistan has sacrificed itself in its fight against terrorism. And yet, when it comes to Chinese nationals being attacked in Pakistan, then China, of course, goes into a huff and is very unhappy that Pakistan doesn't provide protection.
Let me ask, let's ask.
It's an extremely selfish, self-centered view that China takes, and it will have repercussions on its relations with India inevitably.
But let's ask Professor Victor Gao, why pick Pakistan over India? We are a more reliable nation, stronger, safer, and of course more financially much sound. Why would you want to put your eggs in a bottomless bucket, Professor Victor Gao?
Thank you very much for having me. As far as China is concerned, the Indian subcontinent, which now contains both India and Pakistan, has always been very important to China. And throughout thousands of years, the relations between China and the Indian subcontinent has always been peaceful. Now the fact that there is India on the one hand and Pakistan on the other hand, China need to make decisions on the merits of each of the situation. There is no denying that China-Pakistani solidarity and cooperation are deeply rooted, and nothing can shake this brotherliness between China and Pakistan. On the other hand, I would say China values friendship and good neighborliness with India. After all, both China and India each has a population of more than 1.4 billion, and they have tremendous amount of responsibilities for each of them, as well as for mankind as a whole. Therefore, I don't think China wants to develop China-Pakistani relations and friendship at the expense of China-India relations. And I do hope eventually China's relations with India as well as with Pakistan will be tremendously beneficial for each of us. And as China has pulled off the peace treaty between Iran and Saudi Arabia, I hope eventually China can play a very positive role in creating a better rapprochement between India and Pakistan.
When you say, Professor Victor Gao,
neighboring countries.
Professor Victor Gao, when you say equations with Pakistan, I hope you mean the Pakistan military establishment and the Pakistan civilian government. Is that
well,
what?
From the Chinese perspective, there is only one Pakistan, and we do not bother in the domestic internal affairs of Pakistan.
I mean
whether it's involving the Pakistani government or the military.
So is Sajid Mir a proscribed terrorist? Sajid Mir, a proscribed terrorist, also part of this brotherhood of Pakistan?
Allow me to emphasize, China is a victim of international cross-border terrorism in itself. Therefore, China condemns cross-border international terrorism in all shapes and colors. Then, as to how to deal with each organization, China will need to make its own decision on the merits of each decision, and China will need to do its own homework, rather depending on the representations of any of the other organizations. Therefore, I hope you will also respect China's sovereign right to make its own decision as to how it wants to designate an organization one way or another. That decision is not made by any other country, but by China itself.
Yeah, but Sajid Mir is a proscribed terrorist. We've got visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi leaving New York and heading towards the Andrews base in Washington, D.C. Plenty of people who have come there, the diaspora wanting to meet him, and then him making his way out. So the popularity of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the time invested by President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden, very evident. The diaspora, very popular. Daniel, China says it does not respect terrorists, but they continue to exercise this technical hold. How would you read this? Are we looking at an escalation? Is China clearly saying either US or us to India?
I don't perceive this as necessarily an escalation. I think Ambassador Sybil had it exactly right. This is a pattern that's been going on for some time. China's been shielding a variety of Pakistan-based terrorists from international action. These are individuals who are quite clearly problematic, should not be shielded from sanction. But China sees its relationship with Pakistan as very important. I think China pockets some advantages with Pakistan from doing this. Some leverage, some influence is seen as helpful by Pakistan. I think China has, unfortunately, for regional stability, more or less reached a conclusion that it's got a serious problem on its hands with India, and that India and the United States are increasingly tied together, and that makes the India problem that much harder. So I think China is not only signaling to Pakistan, to India, it's also signaling to the United States that it doesn't need to play by these particular rules, and that it will continue to sort of do what suits China best, and not necessarily to see terrorism in the way that we do. And I'll make one last point. The Chinese have, obviously there have been some very high-level meetings between our Secretary of State Blinken and Chinese leaders in Beijing, where both sides have suggested that there may be more that they can do together in a cooperative way, with some serious caveats. I think a message like this is another indication of the limits of that cooperation and the way that China will sort of frame that cooperation in ways that suit Beijing, not necessarily ways that suit the United States.
Ambassador Sybil?
Well, China is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It plays a very active role in the United Nations. It talks about the UN Charter, etc., etc. Part of adhering to the UN Charter and UN principles is the fight against terrorism. And here China has double standards. When it comes to terrorism directed at China, that's a big issue. When it comes to terrorism directed at India, it's not an issue. They will support Pakistan. Now, the point is that there are elements in Pakistan actually who are promoting terrorism against China. India has absolutely no role in promoting any kind of terrorism against China. And yet China doesn't see the difference. Because China has this very arrogant posture towards India that they don't need to bother about India's sensitivities. They have the power, so they can do what they want in accordance with their own interests. Just now, the Chinese gentleman said that they will decide on their own what the realities are. What will they do? Will they go and investigate on the ground, send people on the ground, talk to Sajid Mir, talk to the Pakistani establishment, find out what the reality is, talk to other people who have information about his role? After all, United States put a $5 million bounty on it. When they say they will talk to, they make their own judgment based on what? Based on their hostility towards India, or based on certain principles on which there is a genuine international consensus? Now, as far as China's role in Saudi Arabia, Iran is concerned, let's not hype it up. Let's not hype it up. It is actually Iraq and Oman that played a vital role. And of course, Iraq and Iran both wanted some kind of a big power that could give some kind of a cover to this agreement, and they went to China. So let's not hype this peace business. If they really mean peace, then they should make peace with India on the border.
But Kamal Sibalji and Daniel, final
to revert back to the positions they held.
I have the final 2 minutes. So quickly, I want to understand, how do we change this status quo, especially at the UN? This veto power thing, how can this be undone? The reforms, if they have to kick in, if there have got to be additions to the UN Security Council, changes in the UN, how is this going to happen? Kamal Sibalji, and then Daniel.
It won't happen in the foreseeable future, frankly, because there is a consensus that UN should be reformed, but how it should be reformed, what should be the numbers involved in terms of permanent members, non-permanent members, there is no agreement. And then China will not let India come in. China will not let Japan come in. Russia will not let Japan come in, and Germany come in. We have a consensus, at least 3 or 4 permanent members. But there are other people in the global south that we are taking leadership of, which do not support India's permanent membership, for that matter, any expansion of permanent membership. So I think it's going to be a very difficult task.
So then do we dismantle UN altogether? Should nations move away and form a separate organization, Daniel? Because this is like a never-ending merry-go-round.
Right. No, I mean, there's going to be frustration with the UN process. That's been a feature of the UN basically since the start. The ambassador, again, is correct. Don't anticipate any near-term reforms that would resolve this particular problem, or even some of the more general problems about lack of representation for vast parts of the world at the UN, and so on and so forth. It's not going to change. That doesn't mean you get rid of it, though. The UN serves other purposes. If the UN didn't exist, you'd need to reinvent it. People need a place, physical place, and different mechanisms to meet, and it's good to have these conversations, even if we don't get what we want through the UN process.
Right.
The United States and India and other countries who are concerned about these terrorist groups can still speak up, and they can do so in the UN, and that's part of its value.
Well, let's see what happens in that one-on-one personal engagement, private engagement between President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Kanwal Sibalji and also Daniel, thank you. Daniel Market, thank you very much for your time. Victor Gao, Professor Victor Gao, thank you for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, before we take a short break, quickly going across to Annalise Richmond-Ji, who's joining us now. If you have watched the Yoga Day celebrations at the UN headquarters, she was the one leading everybody, leading the proceedings there. She's a yoga guru herself, a very senior teacher at the Art of Living, and I'm hoping she's able to join us. Annalise Ji, namaste, and thank you very, very much for your time. I know you're just stepping out of the UN headquarters. How was the experience? I believe you've walked into the record books.
Yes, it was overwhelmingly beautiful. It was quite an honor and privilege that Art of Living Foundation was invited to lead the yoga for Prime Minister Modi ji and the mayor of New York City. And we got to have our young yoga enthusiasts, as young as the age of 8, were part of leading the yoga. They trained for a few weeks for this, and it was very, very beautiful and very inspiring to see Prime Minister Modi ji practicing yoga with so much, passion and so much presence in the middle of this beautiful field with everyone.
Was he able to do the entire routine? Did you get a chance to speak with the Prime Minister?
I did. He came and spoke with us afterwards. He actually invited all of the children to come visit India. They were very excited about that. And he told us that we led it perfectly with much precision, and he was very happy about it and the peaceful meditation. And it's really wonderful to meet him in person. You can tell he practices yoga and meditation because he has such a peaceful and welcoming vibe.
Were you nervous? You are leading perhaps the largest group of nationalities. That's the Guinness record that you have set. Maximum nationalities coming together to perform yoga. I know you're a senior teacher, but was there any nervous moment for you?
Maybe I was a little nervous because I've been leading yoga and meditation with Art of Living for 23 years.
Yes.
But I normally lead according to what I feel the audience wants. But this time there was a protocol, of course, and I had to learn the protocol. But once I stepped onto the stage and saw so many beautiful people ready to practice, I realized we're here to make them feel peaceful. So it was actually very peaceful. I do feel like that this is a chance for us to express that the world is a one world family, Vasudeva Kutumbakam,
yes,
which is one of the most beautiful messages that comes out of India. And today we truly had a one world family, 135 countries in one yoga session. Art of Living will also be doing this in Washington, D.C. on the National Mall, right in front of the Capitol building.
Wow.
The World Culture Festival
in September.
also will bring together 180 countries as a one world family on September 30th and September 29th and October 1st. And that is the next step to make 100,000 people meditate together and practice yoga. So in the United States, we're very inspired by this concept of one world family, and we'd like to help make it happen.
Is yoga science or spiritualism? Is there any element of theology involved to all the naysayers who believe it's a religious push, it's a Hindutva push? Annalise ji, for somebody who's been practicing it for 23 years, let me ask you.
You know what's interesting is in 2004, about 5 years after I started teaching yoga and breathing techniques through the Art of Living, I took it into the public school system and into the universities in the USA. We now have it in 108 universities, public and private. And I would say the human being breathes, right? Do you breathe? I also breathe. There's nothing spiritual, well, there is spiritual, but nothing religious or theological about breathing. It is something that's connected to the human nervous system. And when we get in touch with our breath and learn how to use it, we learn how to calm our emotions, maintain peace and equanimity. Even in the midst of chaos, we can be very strong, calm, and powerful. And that's something that every human being who has 2 feet and 2 eyes needs to learn how to do. And that is something basic and also spiritual to the human existence.
So science and spiritualism, nothing religious about it. That's what you're saying. That's the art of living, and that's what you're practicing, and you've made so many of them do today at the UN headquarters. Annalise Richmond ji, thank you so much for your time and at short notice for joining us here this evening. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a very short break. When we come back, what does Rajeev Chandrasekhar, Union Minister, think about the Musk versus Dorsey? Whose tweet or point of view does he verify? We ask him that question. Stay with us.
So it was a very good conversation about urbanization, and he articulated very well the main message, which is that urbanization is not a problem. It's an opportunity, and I take it this is a slogan that he's used before. So for me, a good day is when I learn something, and I learned a bunch about what India is doing. India could really show the world how to do it right.
My colleague Abhishek joins us this morning from the newsroom to prepare you, our audiences, with all that it is you need to know to understand the meetings that are taking place. Abhishek, good morning. Abhishek, one expert summarized the next 3 days in a single sentence. He said that the goal for both Prime Minister Modi and for the US President Joe Biden is to create a balanced security equation in Asia long term. Do you agree with that?
Of course, because, having a hawkish stance is not going to work, and with the kind of challenges that the unipolarity of world to some extent has received in the recent years, having a practical approach is something that USA also needs to understand, and why USA is coming closer to India has also a lot to do with the, facing with the geopolitical realities that are coming from China, that are coming from Russia, and that are also coming from, other economies, other emerging economies. So clearly, and we have seen experts like just recently we were listening those remarks by the experts with whom Prime Minister had a meeting, and they were expressing various opinions on the geopolitical issues, how the Indian economy has worked in the last several years, and what Prime Minister Modi's vision has been even before he was the Prime Minister of India, and how did he look at the problems of urbanization and as an opportunity, and what all needed to do to continue that robust economic growth that India is currently very much on. So clearly, all those things are being talked about in USA right now, and Prime Minister Modi is interacting with people from all walks of life.
Okay. Abhishek, I now want to understand from you, much attention has been paid to the fact that this is an official state visit. The Prime Minister has travelled to the United States 7 times in the past, but this is the first time it's been accorded that level in terms of diplomatic relations. Can you just explain to our audiences why an official state visit is so important?
So, Toya, we have talked about it earlier also, but for our audience, it is said that a state visit used to be extended to the most powerful leader or the supreme leader of any country back in the era of when the democracies were not very much around the globe and the kings used to rule, and so the state visit used to be mostly offered to kings practically, but ever since this democracies arrived and many countries around the world has become democratic. In fact, UK also has a Prime Minister who is now practically the executioner of power, and the kings or the queen are just a symbolic head of the state. So the overall in the later years, the country started extending that state visit honor to the real leader or the leader who has the power and authority to decide and to rule the country or to decide or take decision for the country. So in that context, state visit have now been started being extended to the leaders who are not the state leader, the state head, In India's case, the state head is president, of course, but we know the major executioner powers lie with the Prime Minister. So the state visits have been also being started to the Prime Ministers of various countries, and in that context, it is an important visit when the highest level of protocol is being extended to the Prime Minister of India when he is on a visit to USA, and the protocol which is the highest is the official state visit.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the United States for a 3-day official state visit. He's obviously going to be meeting the United States President and his wife. But right before that, let's cover the schedule of the Prime Minister, because he's already received a rousing welcome as he landed in New York. He met with Indian diaspora members at the Hotel Lotte in New York. That's where he's going to be staying for the part of his trip, just the day in which he's going to be in New York. Now, over the last few hours, the Prime Minister has met with CEOs and thought leaders, meeting with everyone from Elon Musk, who of course heads both Tesla and Twitter, to authors and astrophysicists like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Now, we're going to bring you more context on the meetings itself, but we're also going to first tell you what's planned for the rest of the day. The Prime Minister is going to be participating in International Yoga Days ceremonies. They're going to be taking place at the United Nations lawns. After that, the Prime Minister will be leaving the city of New York. He'll be flying to Washington, where he'll be welcomed by President Joe Biden and his wife for the official part of these meetings. That's where much of the more serious discussions around India and the US's partnership will take place. Now, we're going to show you all of the reactions that are coming in right now. These are the thought leaders and CEOs who've met with the Prime Minister. First, we have the head of Bridgewater Associates, billionaire investor Ray Dalio. This is what he had to say. Take a look.
Prime Minister Modi is a man whose time has come at the time that India's time has come. The potential of India is enormous, and you have now a reformer, a radical reformer, who has the ability to transform it and the popularity to transform it. So I think India and Prime Minister Modi are at a juncture in which there's going to create a tremendous opportunity, tremendous changes in India that are going to be really startling.
He asked me if I had heard from anybody anything that he might know. So in a way, he asked, when I was in Delhi and so on. And I only mentioned that I think people in the whole world would be very excited if he made a little more strong statement about the invasion of Ukraine and disapproving of that, unlike Xi Jinping, who is like a big autocrat and has to tell Putin to go ahead. Meanwhile, Russia is really in trouble, And so India has old friendship, and I don't mean some extreme thing, but he might just mention how, invading another country is not really a good idea.
I was delighted to spend time in the company of a head of state who is as scientifically thoughtful as is Prime Minister Modi. So many leaders of the world, I think their priorities might be out of balance with what it needs to be going into the 21st century. With all of the challenges we have in civilization, the solutions are going to come from innovations in science and technology and engineering.
Let's go straight across to Union Minister Rajeev Chandrasekhar ji, who's joining us on a day when thought leaders are commending Prime Minister Narendra Modi. On the 9th edition of the International Yoga Day, the celebrations have just gotten over with Prime Minister Narendra Modi leading it there at the UN headquarters. Rajeev ji, namaste. The world is bending to India's tune, but leaders who came out said it's some very significant and good things after meeting the PM.
Absolutely, I think it is a tremendous vindication of what Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has done for India over the last 9 years, and to have these global leaders come out and talk about India in these terms, where Elon Musk says, I think India has more promise than any other country in the world. Ray Dalio, the investor, says the potential of India is enormous. And then when you say Neil deGrasse Tyson say, I'm sure that I'm not alone when I say the potential of what India can accomplish knows no limits. It is absolutely gratifying that the world today is recognizing India's rise and is looking at the future that India represents with a great deal of awe and respect and positivity. I think it is, as an Indian, I feel tremendously proud when I hear it, and it's not because some foreigner is saying it. I think this is a feeling that most Indians have, most young Indians have, about the optimism about the future in terms of looking into the future for India. But when the rest of the world also echoes what we feel, I think it's certainly a vindication and validation of how far we have traveled as a nation.
But Rajeevji, when they say that India has potential, Elon Musk says, I'm coming to India next year, we'll set up Tesla or we'll bring it when humanly possible. There's a sense of deja vu. In the past भी कहा जाता था हमें देखना है, हम देख रहे हैं, हम देखते रहेंगे.
No, look, I think, Anand, you have to understand that there is a trend that is very, very visible to those who want to see it. And the trend is this, that every global brand today, whether it is Apple or Samsung or Cisco or any of these brands that are tech brands or manufacturing brands, are increasingly looking at India as a cannot ignore part of their supply chain. And I will predict today that in the next 3 to 5 years, India will be an almost necessity for every company that is in the manufacturing space for India to be a manufacturing hub. We are progressing down this line. And Anand, when people look at these statements and say, oh, it's a cup half full, he has not said he's flying tomorrow and he's not setting up the plant day after tomorrow, that is not how these decisions are made. These are big decisions, big plants that require big investments, big skills, big talent, and a big kind of logistical infrastructure to be built. So these are not trivial decisions that are to be made at the snap of a finger. But the fact that Elon Musk is saying that India is certainly on his radar, he is certainly going to evaluate India as a manufacturing hub for his next generation EVs, is a positive, very, very positive thing, because Tesla then joins the rest of these global brands in evaluating India as being a trusted part of their supply chain.
True, but Rajeevji, Musk versus Dorsey, whose tweet are you going to verify?
No, I think, look, I have always maintained that as far as the government is concerned, we really don't bother about who the owner of a platform is. It is really what we are tasked with is to ensure that platforms comply with Indian law. And I have repeatedly said this is not some adversarial jousting between the government and the platform. It is a commonsensical expectation of any company that comes to India, wants to do business in India, that they comply with Indian law, because that is the way democracies function, that is the way countries where rule of law is followed. Whether you're a manufacturing company, you're an internet platform, you're a social media platform, foreign or Indian, big or small, in India, if you do business, you have to comply with Indian law. There is nothing more commonsensical and simple and intuitive to understand than that. But unfortunately, I think in some cases, this was not easily understood, and some people were under this misguided, delusional belief that the laws and rules of India did not apply. And I am glad that today, across the board, most platforms, if not all, accept that compliance with Indian laws is not some request, but it's an actual need. It's an absolute must.
Point well made. But the Congress has now posted a picture of former Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru's Shirshasana and taken a jibe at Prime Minister Narendra Modi with Kamarasana. How would you want to respond?
No, I don't want to respond to them at all. I think their single point agenda is that whenever there is something to celebrate, that they come in there like a wet blanket to create a downer, some sort of a narrative out there. I certainly don't want to waste my time responding to them. There's an old saying that I use when people try and provoke me on the internet: never wrestle with a pig, because the pig walks away very happy, and the person who wrestles with the pig just walks away dirty. So I don't intend to engage into any of the debate that they want to provoke people into. They're free to do what they want. They're free to post however outrageous images that they want to post. It's a free world, and they're protected by Article 14 and 19.
Well, internal politics to geopolitics. On the issue of Sajid Mir, China has once again blocked a move to get him proscribed as a global terrorist. Do you believe these are signs which are ominous for Bharat?
No, look, I think the message that countries and democracies today are sending to the world is an important message, that rule of law is important. That at the end of the day, a wider set of alignment to the values that all people are entitled to be safe, to law and order, to safety, and it cannot be that you have different standards for different types of crimes and different countries committing the same crime. So I think this is in a sense a conflict between two sets of values that is happening in public around the world. And the people of the world eventually and slowly will decide that it is not enough to look at everything through opportunism and through geopolitics. That India's message of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, India's message of equity and opportunity and fairness and rule of law, and that democracies like India and US and other democracies really are trying to spread a message that every citizen, even if it is a citizen in an embattled country, needs to be having a right to safety and security, and terrorism should not be given a free pass just because the terrorist happens to be a friend of a country or an ally country. So I think these are conversations that the world is going to have to engage in, and India is on the right side of this. Like Honorable Prime Minister has said, that we are not neutral, we are proponents of peace, we are not neutral in any of these disputes. We basically talk about sovereignty, integrity, and a fight against terrorism that is based on common values and consistency. So I think this is, Anand, this is something that will have to play out over the coming years.
Well, Rajeev Chandrasekhar ji, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very, very much for once again taking the right stand. Thank you so much. Namaste. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wind up this edition of The Right Stand, but not before we say a quick hello to the one and only Zaka Jacob, who's ready with brass tacks, but from New York City. I can see the smile. Good early morning to you, Zaka. With the suit, don't tell me you did yoga with the suit today. I saw you at the UN headquarters.
So this morning has been a crisscross across New York City. Right now I'm coming to you live from 30 Hudson Yards, which is the headquarters, the offices of CNN here in New York City. It's on the west side of town. And earlier this morning at about 7, 8 in the morning, we were on the east side of town at the UN headquarters, which is in this beautiful neighborhood, Turtle Bay. So we basically crisscrossed from the east side of the city to the west side of the city to bring you brass tacks live from New York.
So was it the tube or was it shoes? You had your running shoes on. Did you take the tube or did you whistle and hail a cab and make your way across?
You know,
that's how they do it in New York.
When TV calls you, you always have a cab at your service. So yeah, we cabbed it across town.
But was that historic? I just want to ask you, what you witnessed today, did you expect such a huge turnout? They've entered into the Guinness records. Before we get into brass tacks, I think we just got 30 seconds for me to understand from you. Did you expect such a huge turnout at the UN headquarters?
Oh, I think it was pretty phenomenal. I think the organizers were saying that they were expecting about 3,000 people. We had figures in that ballpark, but I think more than the number, it was really about the the different nationalities who turned up. And like you said, the Guinness Book of World Records has acknowledged this as the event, singular event in which multiple nationalities, people from multiple nationalities have taken part. 135, I think, is the official figure that they gave. I think it was pretty phenomenal. I think it sort of stamps the fact that yoga is now part of mainstream consciousness and culture here in America. So thank you very much. On that note, welcome to this special live edition of Brass Tacks, coming to you live from New York City. As I said, you can see the New York skyline right behind me, the beautiful Hudson River. I'm coming to you from 30 Hudson Yards, which is the CNN offices here in New York City. So it was a momentous occasion at the UN headquarters. Prime Minister Modi leading 130 plus nations, representatives of 130 plus nations in the International Yoga Day